Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the STEM Files on OMS TV. We are no longer on Blog Talk Radio. Once again, we are no longer on Blog Talk Radio. And I am Tariq Mohammed, Chief Operating Officer of Original Man Scientific, as well as the founder. Now, usually when we're doing this show, you see someone else in the camera view, but unfortunately, our co-host Jabril Mohammed could not make it tonight due to prior engagements. But have no fear, I'm still joined by Jabril, by Allah's grace. So I want to welcome our guest. He is a human molecular geneticist with the National Institutes of Health and not Health and Human Services, but National Institutes of Health, the NIH, located in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Jabril. How you doing?
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, soldier. I'm doing well. Happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tonight's episode is about the genetics of our people. And the vision behind this episode was really to dive into the overall, the overall impact that the world and everything in the world has had on the genes of people around the world, especially Black people.
Right.
So this is a very important episode. This is the episode that I pray that everyone who is viewing is enlightened and is able to share with others, especially about different things that they may not have known. So, Jabril, before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are in your career, and why this episode was important for you for it to take place?
So again, my name is Dr. Jabril Mohammed. I am a human molecular geneticist. I do work at the National Institute of Health. My career began working within the field of prostate cancer development and carcinogenesis. From that, I actually I acquired my PhD and completed my dissertation in that field and became an expert in. And then I transitioned from that field into breast cancer, tumor regenesis, and stem cells, both of which are important to me due to the fact that I have family or familial issues, and most Black folks are predisposed to carcinogenesis, regardless if it's of the prostate, the breast, lung, whatever the case may be. We do have a higher mortality rate when it comes to breast cancer development and prostate cancer development. Therefore, it became a personal issue of mine to further research and investigate genetic causes or causations for these anomalies that may exist. Where I am as far as my career, I'm a postdoctorate researcher at the National Institute of Health, which is the continuation of education after you receive your doctorate. It's more of a place where you develop your craft and sharpen your skills more as a researcher, where you start to become not only a master of the craft, but you become a notable figure for other scientists in the field to, respect and also refer to your science and your work as being crucial for the furthering of the field that other people are indulged in, and just overall, just the knowledge that goes into the field of prostate and breast cancer research.
Beautiful. Bonafide.
Oh, and you wanted me to answer why was this episode important to me, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the genetics of our people, I guess segueing from why I began my research in carcinogenesis and cancer research is not only due to the fact that I have family that are predisposed to such conditions due to genetic causations, but also our people in general. Our people live in stressful environments, and what hasn't been taught to us is how the environment impacts the genome and how our normal circumstances affect and influence our cellular behavior. So because we weren't taught and trained that from a very, early, we weren't taught that earlier on in our childhood, we seem to believe that as long as we thrive in these conditions, as long as we live and as long as we continue to persist, somehow that is living. And somehow you can live and still be optimal. When in fact, that's not true. The very impact of the environment on the cellular and genomic level of our people, it becomes detrimental and deleterious to not only cellular behavior, but also organ function, especially just the body and how it moves and operates on a day-to-day routine. Again, because we're blinded by the idea of thriving and persisting, we equate existing with living, and those two are not equatable.
Right.
So it's important to me, due to the fact that I possess a certain amount of knowledge by Allah's permission, to share with the public on not only how the environment necessarily impacts the genome, but how paying attention to how we think, what we eat, where we are, and how we live can ultimately enhance and increase our living circumstances and our optimal living conditions.
Yes, sir. Beautiful, beautiful. Now, before we continue and go into the topic at hand, this field of science is a very big responsibility. What made you get into this field, and what was it about it? So, okay, this is something I want to dedicate a good part of my life to, and use it to help save my people.
That's a good question. At times, we embark on journeys in our life due to what we call circumstances and situations.
Right.
I am no stranger to that. I've had several people close to me perish due to lack of knowledge, as the scriptures would say. And the reality is that those people that were close to me that passed away due to situations that were beyond them, as we would call terminal illnesses such as cancer, some of which could have been avoided, therefore my passion comes from not only those that have fallen to the idea of terminal illnesses such as cancer, but I hope to provide a better understanding, number one, that will ultimately lead to better surveillance of terminal illnesses such as cancer and better treatment. Because this is the reality. The reality is that if you believe that you're going to beat cancer at stage 4, you're sadly mistaken. And unfortunately, our people, when it comes to Black America, we fall into this spectrum where we believe that as soon as we feel an ache or pain, or we feel something wrong with the body, we can shake it off the next day. And I think I've said this on the previous broadcast here. In reality, they don't take a second glance or a second look at what those aches and pains could be, especially dealing with age, because it seems as though we as Black America don't understand that as age increases, so does the propensity for cancer development. Therefore, the likelihood of surveillance should increase as well. So if you look at the numbers as far as mortality rates when it comes to breast cancer development and prostate cancers, just those two in general, breast and prostate, it's make it seem as though Blacks die more often, which is true. The numbers are undeniable, but it's not due to the fact that the cancer is necessarily different. It's due to the fact that when you compare and contrast Black America, sorry about that.
You good.
Yeah, when you compare Black America to Caucasian, to white America, you're looking at one population that cares so much about surveillance and their daily mammograms and daily prostate exams, right? Mm-hmm. Versus the other that has an intrinsic fear and an innate fear of the healthcare field and healthcare overall entity, that they flatly refuse to get checked out when they do have these aches and pains. One, due to the fear of, let's say, the physicians inappropriately handling them. Two, of past experiences and history when it comes to, physicians and hospital care, but also mainly because Black folks fear the results of such things. They fear hearing the results, knowing that the results may be a terminal situation that they may not make it back from. But due to lack of understanding of what cancer is, you can always beat cancer if you catch it at stage 1, stage 2. You see what I'm saying? If you catch it in this most benign sense, if you catch it in this most encapsulated sense, you can always beat it.
Right.
But if you not understanding the process of how cancer develops and misunderstanding how healthcare and the hospital care, I guess, they're working for you and or working against you, you know, having the lack of knowledge of that will cause you to overall overlook your pain, your ache, and then later on realize that you've had prostate cancer the whole time, you know, and I've had individuals in my life suffer from that exact scenario. So I'm not speaking out of happenstance, or I'm not speaking out of what I don't know. I'm speaking from pure experience, minus the fact that I've had people in my family history that suffer from it, like an aunt recently who passed from triple negative breast cancer. But I've also been in the clinic with the oncologist. I've seen patients suffer from this on a day-to-day basis. So this topic and pretty much how I got into this field has a lot to do with the fact that I understand that our people are not taught and trained the way that they should to handle a situation that may be inevitable, but also treatable. You see what I'm saying? Also treatable. It may be inevitable due to the environment being as polluted as it is, due to the diet of our people being as corrupt as it is and degenerative as it is. But even in such bleak conditions and in such a bleak reality, cancer is definitely treatable. Definitely. If caught early enough and, you know, surveyed.
Got you. Now, when you said cancer is definitely treatable and preventable, would you mix the word cure in there anywhere?
I mean,
that's a word that a lot of people don't like to touch.
Yeah, so I'm happy you brought that up, and I'm one of those, especially being in the Nation of Islam, that will marry the Western side of medicine with the Eastern side of medicine, and I'm here to break up some myths here, right? So, number one, are there cures to cancer? Of course there are.
That's right.
Of course there are. That should be understood. Prime example, when one talks about the Wahlberg effect. Okay, the Wahlberg effect by Dr. Wahlberg, he postulated that every cancer or every tumor, the environment, okay, has a pH level that is acidic, okay? That if you change the pH level within the tumor, you can override the actual cellular mechanisms and shrink the tumor inside. Now, granted, he wasn't talking about stage 4, because stage 4 is metastatic. When the tumor gains a blood supply of its own and it invades other tissues and other organs. He's talking about stage 1, stage 2 when it's still encapsulated. But even in stage 1 and stage 2, how many cancers operate that way? So here's the myth, right? We, as the people, believe all cancer is the same, but it isn't. All cancers do not follow the same principle. You see what I'm saying? So the Wahlberg effect, if you change the pH in certain tumors, will affect certain tumors, but not all tumors. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about another situation. Radiation. Why is radiation such a predominant course of treatment for cancer patients? Mainly because there was another scientist, I forget his name at the point, that he figured out that tumor cells all lack the expression of a protein called a heat shock protein. Okay, so this heat shock protein enables the cell to endure high temperatures. This is just regular. We at 98.6 degrees, our body temperature is set at normal, right?
Right.
But that's pretty high. Don't you agree? Absolutely. That's pretty hot. So the heat shock proteins in every single cell in our body stabilizes and buffers the cells to survive in such high temperatures, right? But a tumor does not have the cellular ability to buffer against that type of heat. So although the other cells in the body would be protected from quote unquote high temperatures like radiation, the tumor won't. And the tumor would shrink and, diminish, but the rest of the cells would be left unaffected. But let me ask you this. Are all tumors the same? No, they aren't.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So for me being a geneticist, you see what I'm saying? I'm a geneticist. I'm a human geneticist. I study the molecular aspects of how the genes mutate and create certain predispositions and phenotypic expression that manifest, right, in a human being. So I have come across certain tumors and cancer that has nothing to do with the Warburg effect. That has nothing to do with, being buffered by heat at all. In fact, there's a certain gene that may come across as being completely overexpressed, and the cells in that specific area overproliferates. What are you going to do against that? You see what I'm saying? Like, what are you planning to do against a gene that is overexpressed in protein expression that's causing the cells to overproliferate? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
There's no amount of diet necessarily speaking that's going to impact that mutated change. You see what I'm saying? Okay. There's no amount of heat that's going to kill that tumor and expect that one tumor to be it. Because when you speak about genetics, other cells may have this mutation. So you may be focused on this one cell that grew to become this tumor, but guess how many other cells have this mutation? You see what I'm saying? Okay. So there's so many other different types of cancer that when you ask the question, is there a cure? Absolutely. There's absolutely a cure. But to what type of cancer? It depends. You see what I'm saying? It depends. So there's so many different approaches as we speak that we're utilizing to kill, in layman term, kill cancer. Right now, we're utilizing, or the most cutting edge methodologies on the market right now is utilizing the immune system to attack the cancer. It's called T-cell immunotherapy.
Right.
So they're weaponizing your T cells to actually attack the cancer cells based on your own immunity. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's the type of world we're moving into as far as treatment of cancer and prevention and things of that nature.
Well, bro, before we continue, I come from a similar background as you do in terms of science, but our audience may not. So
okay.
I'm going to ask you about a few terms, and if you can, just kind of break it down because I know they're going to pop up throughout the show.
Okay.
Metastatic. Can you shed some more light on that?
Say that one more time.
Metastatic.
Okay, so if a patient hears the word metastatic, or if a family member hears the word metastatic, what you're actually hearing, you're hearing about the cancer cell, or the tumor rather, that has become so invasive. It has grew to a point that it is no longer held captive by the cellular environment, that it moves on its own. So from a scientific perspective, the process is called angiogenesis. And angiogenesis, being broken apart, just simply means gaining of a blood supply. Right. So think of the tumor having a life of its own. So if the tumor is being encapsulated from stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, by stage 4, it gains a blood supply and a life of its own, that it breaks out of the environment and it moves through usage of blood vessels, arteries, and it moves to different parts of the organ. It's random, and there's no telling where it may end up. But wherever it ends up, that's a secondary tumor. That when the cells gain its own blood supply and moves to a second organ and it starts to grow and proliferate, that's a second tumor that had a primary position. And the only reason why it moved is because it became metastatic. It became invasive and it broke out of its encapsulated environment.
Now, what makes the cells that are multiplying so rapidly? What makes them break out of that environment or break out of that shell?
That's a good question. As scientists, we're trying to figure out all of the factors. There's several that I can name right now. Mm-hmm. Drastic movement. Believe it or not, and I'm speaking of an aunt that just passed too. I had another aunt that just passed from a rare kidney cancer, right? Mm-hmm. She lived with this rare kidney cancer for about maybe 20 plus years, right? No damage, no effect, no detriment to her being, right? Then all of a sudden, now she was older, she's an older woman. She was an older woman. She fell. And the physician's or the oncologist's perspective on it is that her fall was so impactful to the environment where the cancer was that it assisted in the cancer breaking out of its capsule and shifting to the rest of the body. So a fall could be something that could help. As far as anything else, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to put a bubble on how many things could affect a tumor from actually breaking out of its capsule and invading other parts of the body. That's why you have to stop it before it gets to stage 4, because there's no telling by that point what cells may have leaked out. Where are they? It's no telling. Right. It's no telling.
Man. Wow. So let's see. Another word you mentioned is phenotypic or phenotype. Can you shed some more light on that?
Yeah, phenotype. So that's a genetic terminology that we use to define a physical appearance or physical manifestation of a disease. So we classify certain manifestations as being genotypic and or phenotypic. So phenotype, the pheno is really talking about physical, the appearance of what we actually see, the body. So if you're clinically looking at a person that has, let's say, xeroderma pigmentosum, that's a cancer predisposition of a disease, right? That pretty much the entire network of the body, the veins are completely blue, right? So picture a white person and you're looking at the entire the venal network all throughout their body being completely blue.
Right.
That's a phenotype. You see what I'm saying? That's a phenotypic expression. The genotypic expression deals with the genes involved that cause the phenotype to appear in the first place. You see what I'm saying? So that's what we use as terminology. Phenotype being a manifestation, what you see clinically, and genotype, what you can't see, that caused the phenotype to become manifest in the first place.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are about halfway through our show, and I'm telling you, this brother is a teacher as well as a scientist. I can guarantee you that you have explained cancer a hell of a lot better than most doctors I've come across.
Oh, praise you to Allah. Yes, sir.
Absolutely. So let's go into the topic. Let's go into the topic real quick. So when you think about the environment, you think about history. You know, we're taught that research is best rewarded through history.
Correct.
Just name a few instances in history that you can think of that, especially as it relates to Black people being subjected to some type of damage, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, that may have affected or influenced the amount and prevalence of disease that we have now in the Black community.
So let me tell you something. This is very interesting, right? So I came from a lab at the National Human Genome Center in Washington, D.C. at Howard University's Cancer Center, right? Mm-hmm. And we specialize rather in something called population genetics, where we went into the actual differences of population mutations and the prevalence that existed within both populations, both Black and white, right? And in genetics, we come across a term called heterozygous advantage. Okay? I'm going to give you a true historical reference to exactly what I'm talking about that will answer your question, right? So once upon a time, before the transatlantic slave trade, before you think about the migration, right?
Right.
We're talking about malaria. Now, malaria is highly common in Africa as we speak. Right. You see what I'm saying? It's a common condition. It's a common viral condition that pretty much at the end of the day, there's no way to get around from catching malaria as common as it is over there, right? Now, pretty much malaria deals with, it's a bloodborne disease, okay? It's disease and sickening of the red blood cells, okay? Right. Now, this is what's interesting. After the transatlantic slave trade and the migration, right, you have Africa, right, and our brothers and sisters in Africa that stayed with a genetic predisposition to malaria. Okay. All of a sudden, after the transatlantic slave trade and after the migration, you got black folks in America with the 450 plus year history that we have over here. Guess what we now have a protection against, but a propensity for? Malaria. We have protection against malaria, but we have a propensity for sickle cell anemia.
Right.
So the reality is that we experience a genetic mutation, right, in the red blood cells, right, that causes it to sickle. But if you think about the situation in Africa, the virus wouldn't survive in the red blood cells because of it being sickle. So if a black person with sickle cell anemia went to Africa, they could never have malaria. They can never come down with a malaria attack.
Right.
They can never be infected because the virus will never grow to maturity in the red blood cells that's sickle. However, we now have a propensity for sickle cell anemia due to this migration that at the end of the day, our red blood cells will never be quote unquote normal. It needs oxidation. So due to the fact of it lacking oxidation, it actually forms a sickle, sort of like the scythe from, as we talk about the Grim Reaper, but a sickle crescent moon. And it really shows us that the red blood cell is deprived of oxygen. So the red blood cell dies. And as it moves through the blood vessel, it clumps. That's why people have attacks of angina and things of this nature, right?
Right.
So that is a clear reference to history. Due to the transatlantic slave trade, that we have a heterozygous advantage, that we can no longer go back to Africa and be infected with malaria if you have sickle cell anemia. But if you deal with the black folks here, the proportion of black America more than likely are sickle cell anemic or have the heterozygous gene for sickle cell anemia in general. You see what I'm saying? So that's a clear one right there.
Man, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about another instance in history. Well, let me ask this question real quick before I go into that next question. When you mentioned the sickle cell and the appearance of the cell in terms of why it's called sickle, the crescent shape or the slim concave or convex, I forget which one, but shape that the cells have. Do you think that's a sign of God in science?
Hey, look, man, I'm gonna be very honest with you. God is everywhere. It's a reason why in the Nation of Islam we talk about, instead of saying angels, we say scientists. Right. There's a reason.
That's right.
We don't speak hypothetically about these things. We don't believe in spooknism.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So therein lies a situation wherein there are real scientists at work here. So to ask the question of whether or not God is in science, man, science is the reason why we even know who God is.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? So when we were taught how to study ourselves, and we were taught when the messenger first dealt with us in the 1930s, 34 rather, know thyself, that's a scientific observation. Absolutely. And everything that follows suits to the scientific method, from observation all the way down to a hypothesis, to the results, to the experiment. I mean, you first have to experiment with yourself to know him. But isn't that the same thing that we say of God? The messenger taught us, if you want to know God, you got to study yourself.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? So it all plays a part. So absolutely, God is not only in science. Science is the reason by which we understand God now. It is now it will constantly evolve, just like Allah setting everything into a process of perfection. But it by mere definition of science and what it's the manifestation of the language of God. That's why we say Islam. That's why we say Islam is mathematics and mathematics is Islam.
That's right. Can't have one without the other.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So my next question. Well, before we do that, have you shared the promotional material on your social media?
I believe I have. And if I haven't, I shall.
Okay.
I think
When as you're talking, just go ahead and do that. Let your people know you're on YouTube right now. And one of the instances in history I can think of that comes to mind as we're talking about science and throughout history is Henrietta Lacks.
right.
The Henrietta Lacks, that case was one of the most groundbreaking, at least in their world, in terms of the treatment or the development of vaccines or what have you. Her name was Henrietta Lacks. She was, I think when she was in her early to mid 30s when she succumbed to cervical cancer.
Correct.
And, instead of going through her family, they just went ahead and took a biopsy of her, or took a tissue sample of her, the tumor that was in that killed her, and
right.
it ended up finding a way to multiply whatever it is that they were trying to produce exponentially.
Right.
I always thought in the back of my mind that that was done, or they were able to do that with not only a woman but the Black woman. The first thing I thought about was the Black woman being the mother of civilization, and her womb being able to give life to many things.
Right.
What are your thoughts on, or what are your thoughts on the relation to the woman being the mother of civilization, and then being able to harness the power of not the tumor, but the fact of where the tumor was in her body, and then in turn being able to do what they did in their research?
So let me start by saying this, and as the messenger and as the Honorable Minister Farrakhan has taught us, a nation can rise no higher than its woman. Right. And the Henrietta Lacks story is definitely one of those stories that when you hear it, you know that she is a savior.
Yes.
For a lot of young Black women. Believe it or not, she's also the savior for a lot of white women as well. Because just as much as it was a study on her and her specific tumor, it became quite evident of what was going on in a sample of a Black woman versus what wasn't going on in a sample of a white woman. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So she became a savior for a lot of people. So let me just start by saying that. The story is a beautiful story, although traumatic in a lot of ways, because the evidence of her saving and savior, the reason why I put her in the savior category is because ever since her cells were immortalized and were able to be used throughout several studies, several states, several countries, you're talking about well over hundreds of thousands of publications that were just simply confounding evidence of what is going on in cervical cancer in a population that doesn't even trust the health field to give cells to.
Right.
So this is key. This is very interesting because the reality is, when you really think about the Henrietta Lacks situation, you're talking about there aren't a lot of cervical cancer cell lines available. That's number one. Number two, when you talk about Black America and cell lines, because Blacks do not trust the health field in general, we don't opt to help the health field progress as far as research in general.
Right.
So a lot of the research that's published comes from a biased point of view because all of the cell lines nearly that's worked on come from Caucasians. How do I know? Because I was in prostate cancer research. We only had one cell line that came from one Black man. The majority of them, which wasn't much at all, came from the majority of Caucasians.
Right.
So the point is that had it not been for Henrietta Lacks, even without her discretion being involved, you're talking about a population of Black America that would have been still doomed because we don't understand the biology of the cells in a Black body. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
You can immortalize any cell. You can immortalize any cell. You can proliferate any cell. It's difficult to do, which is why in breast cancer and in prostate cancer, there's so few amounts. But think about it like this as well. The proportion of cell lines as far as what's black and what's Caucasian, how can we ever have any data or research come about how to help black folks when we don't even have black folks samples to work on?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is why, on one hand, I say that it was a tragedy that the family never got their just due and never got they never got the respect and honor and the reparations due
Right.
to the circumstances involved. But what Black America don't understand is how much of a savior, even if you want to say indirectly, because it wasn't taken with her consent, she was a savior to a lot of people. So you say the black woman is the mother of civilization, even in the absence of this woman being here and her consent, her cells, her actual remnants of her body has been used for the helping and savings of millions.
Yes, sir.
You feel what I'm saying? So, I mean, and that's why it's like a double-edged sword when you talk about it. It's a double-edged sword. You know, you don't know whether to come from the angle of, yeah, they did it without her consent, how dare they? Or, man, this black woman, had they not immortalized those cells, how many young women would be dead right now because cervical cancer in a black body is different than the biochemistry of a white woman? You see what I'm saying? Like, we have to think about it in context.
Absolutely. You know, it goes to show you that no matter what is done to us that will affect us negatively, Allah always has something underneath it to undermine it and give some type of value to it, regardless of how bad it is.
Absolutely.
Regardless.
Absolutely.
So, bro, I want to thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation so far. I want to go into your childhood for a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Our childhoods are much a part of history as anything else that we've been talking about. When you made the decision, okay, we talked about earlier about how you wanted to use this science to help your people.
Right.
As a youth, say, you know, in your teen years or even in elementary school, did you see yourself in this type of career?
I did. There's several, you know, because I was born and raised in a nation in Mosque number 6 in Baltimore City.
Yeah.
There's several aunts of mine and uncles of mine that will tell you that from an early age, they felt that I was destined to be a scientist.
Right.
My early scientific endeavors or scientific experiments had a lot to do with some serious issues. And I'm not, you know, casting shade on the young ones that did volcanoes or changed, you know, flower petals with food coloring.
Right.
But I was involved in reporting on necrotizing fasciitis when I was about maybe 11. You know, so my interest as far as science was concerned and, you know, has always been there. My mother, again, she's an RN. So the love of medicine and the love of our people comes from her and wanting to help. My father studies Eastern medicine. So therefore, I've always been concerned with being behind the shadows and producing research and results and data that would influence civilization without me having to be the figurehead, without me having to be the physician, without me having to be in the clinic, because I'm limited at that point. That's what people don't understand. If I was placed in that environment, I would be limited in what I would be able to do and affect change. See, in the clinic or in that environment as a MD, just a regular MD, I'm not able to do much more than follow protocol. And even if I was to follow protocol, what more would I know other than what's in a book? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
The reality is that research evolves every day. It evolves every day. I just had a conversation with a colleague of mine and a best friend of mine, and I was telling her that give me based on an average, right? How long do you think it would take for physicians and for standard operating protocols to match the results or the research that's coming out today to affect change in the people. There's about a 5 to 10 year gap. You see what I'm saying? There's about 5 to 10 year gap by which a hospital, or for nurses all over, doctors all over, and for clinicians all over to ratify and change protocols due to results that are unanimously accepted. But that's 5 to 10 years.
Right.
So that means you're looking at a textbook that's going to change 5 to 10 years, but from 5 to 10 years, research has already changed 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So that's why I wanted to be in the shadows, as they would say. I wanted to produce results and from a research point of view that would affect change. And if I could do it immediately, I wish I could. And that's why a lot of people today are becoming MD PhDs, because they are realizing that in order to affect change, the change that you want, you have to research. You have to actually be a researcher. So I've always been in the field of science. I can't recall a time that I wasn't talking about science. If it wasn't about Nimbus and Columbus clouds, then I was talking about necrotizing fasciitis. And if I wasn't talking about that, then I was talking about paleontology and, sedimentary and volcanic crust and things of that nature. So I was always talking about something.
Man, I'll tell you, this is why I love you so much, because we came up similar ways, born and raised in the Nation of Islam as well. When I was in that age range where you were talking about how you were working on necrotizing fasciitis, I was working on heart disease, and I had mastered different physiologies of different conditions. And by the time I was 17, I was already looking up, worrying about therapies for some of these conditions. What was your response from your peers, those that were in your age group? How did they receive that, wisdom from you?
Well, it's a good question. I will have to say and be honest that a lot of my peers didn't take well to it, and that's fine. I'm not going to lie and act as if I wasn't subjected to peer pressure to be other than, because I was. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I was taught early in life by my father and by, a lot of my uncles in the nation is that when it comes to this world prizes intellect as if intellect is success. It's equivalent. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is mental fortitude is what amounts to success. And mental fortitude and the ability to void and avoid peer pressure to make sure that you can operate and thrive in your own environment outside of influence of others, that's ultimately going to give you an environment where you can learn and become intelligent.
Right.
It's not the other way around. Intelligence doesn't create mental fortitude. Mental fortitude creates a thriving environment for learning to take place. So as far as peers were concerned, sure, I've had those that wanted to subject me to peer pressure, and I had all right to do one or two things, of either repel or be compelled to do whatever it is that I was being pressured to do. Mm-hmm. And I teetered amongst the lines of doing things that others did, but the results of their actions and the consequences that they endured later on in life was obvious to me that it didn't reap better benefits than doing what I was already doing.
Right.
So, most of my peers, they either left me alone or they followed suit, and I started teaching them. My peers became students of mine, and they started to become appreciative of what I was able to bestow upon them. And it was a blessing, and they became brothers and sisters of mine in the circle that I have today.
Now, I'm sure you're impressed a lot of people, in both adults and people in your age group. Were there people that took heed to your knowledge and embraced that?
Yeah. Once now, and this is the good thing, because I come from an era where the adults and the elders, they wanted to teach the young folk, mm-hmm. and they wanted to teach us, but they considered us to be heathens. So I so happened to impress upon the elders, I guess by Allah's permission, of course, by Allah's permission, a wisdom that they found kin to their hearts, and they felt me to be a friend of theirs. So the elders considered me a friend, and my peers considered me a teacher. So there were those, and there still are those, that would listen to me and listen very strategically and very meticulously to everything that I say, to not necessarily poke a hole in it, because they understand that I'm a very critical thinker and I do my research and due diligence, but to actually talk about it later on, converse about it later on, whether in private time or whatever the case may be. I've been honored by a lot of elders, a lot of elders, and science isn't the only field that I have been welcomed to talk to the elders and have been befriended by them. So, yeah, in short, to answer your question, absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is we're actually coming towards the conclusion of the show. I almost don't really want to stop. This has been a very amazing broadcast. One of the things that I asked you on the Blog Talk platform last year, and I can't believe it's actually been a year and 3 months. I thought it was just a little under a year.
Right.
I asked you what science means to you. Like, if you have siblings, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, how old is your youngest sibling? Or are you the youngest?
I would say 28. 27, 28.
Okay, cool. So is everybody in your family in science, or is it just you?
No. My mother is an RN, true.
Wow.
My father studies Eastern medicine, true, but my younger brother, he's in the computer technology. He's in the IT.
Okay, cool. So, say for instance, you're having a conversation with your brother, right? And talking about the different aspects of your respective sciences. What would you tell him? Like, if he asked you, okay, Jabril, what does science mean to you? Why does this science mean so much to you? And what do you see it, and how do you see it growing in the future, especially as it relates to the work that you're doing?
Oh man. Science, in short, science is life, man. Life is science. I feel as though, and I've always said this, the elders agree. When it comes to science, science is a young language.
Yes.
It is a very young language. Religion and spirituality is a very ancient language. A lot of people believe that the two can't be married. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because if that was the truth, then the Nation of Islam wouldn't exist.
That's right.
So I have learned that science, although young, is constantly evolving. Oh, sorry about that. Yes, science is constantly evolving. So in science constantly evolving, it would eventually catch the language of the ancients. It will take some time. Now, if I was to explain what science truly means to me, other than it being life, genetics is the code of life. If anyone wanted to study life for more than what it is, more than a tree, more than a bird, more than a body, more than a blade of grass,
right,
then the reality is that you have to go down to the very molecule by which these things exist. Genetics is the code of life. That's the reason why I chose the science that I'm involved in. Sure, cancer and my family's predisposition to it, and not only my family, but Black America, that's important to me. But in reality, what's the point of even studying cancer as a manifestation of illness when the idea is to prevent? But how can one prevent? How can one treat and honestly prevent when you don't even understand how it came to be?
Right.
We're not talking about strictly biochemistry here. We're not talking about how molecules interact with each other. We're not talking about how systems and organs coexist in physiology and anatomy. We're talking about the very mere development of how proteins come about, how they coagulate, how they come to be in a system. Oh, genetics is the crux of it all.
Go ahead.
Genetics is the crux of it all. Without it, you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't even understand what cancer is. You know what it. You wouldn't understand what cancer is. Like you wouldn't understand what anything is
Right.
had it not been for genetics.
Right.
You know, and I'm not speaking from a biased point of view. You know, don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing shade on anyone's field. You know, I'm just saying that when you look microscopically through the cell and you get to the bare basics, you get genetics, man.
That's
And
right.
sure, a chemist would look at me and say, you know, chemistry is the foundation by which the ATs and GCs come about.
Right.
And that's true. But chemistry can only tell you a story, but for so far.
Right. Right.
You see what I'm saying? Chemistry can only tell you a story, but for so far. So genetics, you know, that's why I chose it. I wanted to understand the code of life and how it became life. And yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. This is, again, I'm going to say it again. This has been a great show. I don't want it to end, but unfortunately, you know, we're coming up on that time. How can people contact you to learn more about you and your research? And make sure you include your social media in there too.
Yes. So I can be emailed. I'll put out my personal one, I suppose, rather than the work one. You don't want the government email to be blown up. So Jabril.Johnson, the number 1 at gmail.com. That's my personal email. Anyone can email me for further questioning, Q&As about anything that you may be pondering about, any disease that you may need a genetic answer for. I'm not only limited to genetics. I've taught many other sciences as well. So, you know, we can definitely have a conversation about science in general, you know.
Awesome. And what are some of the other sciences that you've taught?
Oh man, I've taught everything from Bio 101, 102, biochemistry, plant molecular biology, biotechnology, advanced biotechnology. I've been involved with creating some of the genetic modified plants and organisms that people talk so much about today. I've done that type of work. Microbiology, I've taught a wide range.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so we actually have a question from a viewer. I'm waiting for him to text me the question. Unfortunately, YouTube gives me issues when I'm trying to bounce between screens to see who's in it. So I'm going to wait for his response. But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about GMOs. We still got a little time left. It's crazy because GMOs, when you think about the genetics of our people, GMOs is one of the things that our people think about the most in terms of anything genetic. Matter of fact, you know what? I'm not even going to ask that question. I'm going to ask the question that our audience has posted.
Can you see me, beloved? The same way? Can you see me?
Yes, sir. I can see you.
Okay.
Just waiting for the whole text to come through. Okay. Can you speak on the genetic memory passed down from generation to generation? Also, the significance of nature and nurture, knowing that a predisposition is not predetermination.
Okay.
Ask that. That's from my brother Shahid in Washington, D.C.
All right. So, number one, you know, that's a great question because there's a lot of research being done right now that talks about possible memory being passed down and whether or not genes have anything to do with it. Now, it really depends on how you define memory. It depends on how you define memory, because I give you a prime example. It's without question that the cells have a memory. Without question. See, the cells remember what? What do they remember? Now, in my research, because I deal with stem cell regeneration and we deal with stem cell niches, the cell remembers what it was. It remembers what it was supposed to do, right? However, if you put a testicular cell in a mammary environment, guess what's going to happen?
Go ahead.
That testicular cell becomes a mammary cell. It becomes reprogrammed. Right. So the idea is that, hold on, what signals are being passed to this cell in this environment that's telling it, oh, how does it remember that this environment is for mammary cells only? That you can put any other cell in this environment and it'd be reprogrammed to be a mammary cell. So memory exists. It depends on what you're talking about. Now, I've heard different talks about the memory of a human. So past trauma of a human being passed down from generation to generation as if genes have anything to do with it. Now, the verdict is still out on that. But if we travel from let's say the global plane, and we talk about how trauma affects the body signals the cells signal the genes, then it's quite possible that there's a correlation between the two. Right. That as generations pass, so does the environmental impact and the consequences of the environment. So it passes as well. Now, to further that point, as a geneticist, there's a model that I was taught and trained in at the National Human Genome Center at Howard University, where we say that the gene is the gun, the mutations are the bullets, but the environments pull the trigger, right? So going into the next question, he talked about predisposition, right? Predisposition, not necessarily reaping the actual phenotypic expression, correct? Right. And that's absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. That's an absolute fact. Prime example would be stress. So we know that we know that Black people have predisposition to hypertension. We know that, not only through the genetics, but also through population genetics and just behavioral sciences. We know this to be a fact. However, what's also a fact is that although they may have predisposition due to a mutation in, let's say, whatever gene that may be affected in the heart, it takes the environment to actually phenotypically express or cause phenotypic expression in the individual. Right. The environment does it. Right. So which means you can have mutations all day long, but if the environment does not call for it, if the environment does not trigger it, then you'll never phenotypically express that manifestation of the disease. Right. You see what I'm saying? So nature versus nurture. That was the next phase-in question, right?
Right. The significance of nature versus nurture, knowing that, predisposition is not predetermination. But pretty much what you just said,
yeah, that ties into what I just said, because through nurture, we are nurtured through mom, pop. We become a zygote because of the sperm and ova. Right. So whatever mutations may exist after the zygote is formed and we start to develop into infancy, toddler, and throughout, the environment has to call on the mutation to be manifested. So nurture may be the cause for predisposition, but nature is what causes the manifestations to occur. So which means that as Black America, or the responsibility of you and I, we have to constantly be in an environment that is conducive for our growth and development. That's even on a genetic level. Right. We have to be in a constant conducive environment where our genome doesn't have to express negatively the mutations that may be already that we may be predisposed to a condition, because the mutations are already there. So we have to be conscious of our environment, how we're thinking, what we're eating, so that we don't negatively impact something that already exists for it only to be manifested. And once it's manifested, it's difficult to reel in, if not impossible to reverse it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, audience, there you have it. This has been another edition of the STEM Files on OMS TV. I believe this is our 19th edition since being on YouTube. Matter of fact, actually, no, it's our 20th. One of our episodes was on Facebook Live with Dr. Wesley. But this, I just want to say thank you, beloved. This has been a great show. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge and your ability to relay this kind of information to our people, because we need it.
All praises due to Allah. Thank you, beloved. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we conclude the show, I just want to shed some light on our next guest next Thursday. It's Dr. Abdul Ali Mohammed, who happens to be a mentor of yours. He's gonna burn the house down and kind of go into his history of Abundant Life Clinic and everything he's done in his career. I look up to his to his career. I look up to him as a man, especially as an FOI in science.
Absolutely.
I'm telling you, man, I cannot wait for that show. Matter of fact, Brother Jabril, if you'd like to join us and chime in live with us, that'd be great. Be all four of us on there.
All praises due to Allah. Hey, look, man, when it comes to, that's my uncle. That's the uncle. And every time I'm with him, it's always a blessing. If he's listening now, I love you, Unc. He has been, not only a mentor of mine, but he has helped me in the field of science understand it from a total different perspective.
Yes.
And my maturity in this field to be able to relay the information that I just relayed is of Dr. Alim's mentorship. So it's a blessing to have him as a mentor and as of a friend, because that's what Dr. Alim calls me now, a friend. So I'm blessed to be that of his, and still a mentee of his. And
wonderful.
Absolutely, I would love to chime in.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, if it's by the will of Allah, there'll be all four of us on that special episode. That'll be our 20th edition on YouTube. I just want to say again, thank you, beloved, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Soldier.
Tuesday is considered the most boring day of the week. So I appreciate you taking the time out on this boring day and just, giving us all you have.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure it wasn't all you have, but you gave us kind of the tip of the iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg, beloved.
All right. For one last time before we go, can you kind of share with the audience where they can reach you, how they can communicate with you?
Yes, my personal email is Jabril, JABRIL.Johnson, 1 at gmail.com. I can also be reached, through my social media. Jabril Mohammed. You can look me up there. Inbox me any of your questions. I'll do my best to not only answer it in a timely fashion, but give you as much as I have so that you can make decisions on your own regarding health questions or concerns. So, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, as my illustrious co-host, Brother Jabril, would say, this has been another cracking open of the STEM Files on YouTube, OMS TV. I'm your host, Tariq Muhammad, Chief Operating Officer and founder of Original Man Scientific. Please tune in this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time as we interview Dr. Abdul Ali Mohammed. The following Saturday, we will be interviewing Brother Anthony Coleman out of Chicago. Beautiful physicist. Can't wait to have him on. Thank you for tuning in. Peace.